Maid panics when she sees necklace on Billionaire's son. And as she steps closer, something about the way he looks at her, the words he begins to say, and the meaning behind that familiar piece she thought was lost forever, forces her to completely freeze. Her breath catching in her throat, her hands shaking as she tries to understand how a child in a mansion full of silent rules could be wearing something that should belong to someone from a life she buried long ago. A life she never expected to see reflected back at her through the innocent eyes of a boy who doesn't even realize the weight of what he is holding, leaving her torn between running away, demanding answers, or finally facing the one truth she has spent years trying not to remember, while the walls of the estate seem to listen. The staff pretends not to notice, and the family she works for watches everything without saying a word. The Bennett estate stood in Fairfield, Connecticut, a monument to wealth and silence. Inside lived William Bennett, a billionaire known more for what he didn't say than what he did. After losing his wife during the birth of their son Noah, William had changed completely. He stopped smiling, stopped engaging, and buried himself in distant routines. His mother, Eleanor Bennett, controlled everything with rigid precision. She decided meal times, clothing, who could enter, who could leave. Nothing happened without her approval. The mansion looked beautiful from the outside, but felt cold inside, silent, tense, and suffocating. Little Noah spent most of his days alone. His father rarely played with him. His grandmother enforced strict schedules and locked certain doors. "Not for children," she would say. The house held many rooms, but Noah was allowed in only a few. There was very little laughter, very little warmth. Among the staff was Peter, the gardener. He was quiet, observant, with kind eyes and a careful demeanor. Peter had worked there for years and noticed everything. He saw how Noah looked through windows, longing to run outside. He saw how William avoided his own son. He saw Eleanor's iron control, but Peter kept his observations to himself. He had learned that asking questions could cost someone their job. Grace Miller arrived on a Monday morning with a small suitcase and a grief-stricken heart. She had recently lost her daughter Emma to cancer, a loss that had hollowed her out completely. She needed work. She needed survival. The Bennett mansion would give her that. Eleanor conducted the interview with cold precision, watching Grace's every movement. Grace kept her composure, though her eyes held a sadness that couldn't be hidden. When Eleanor explained her rules with mechanical efficiency, Grace nodded and accepted them all. On her first afternoon, while carrying laundry down the hallway, Grace saw Noah standing near a doorway. He looked up at her with curious eyes and, without warning, gave her a quick, shy hug. Grace froze for a moment, touched by the simple gesture. It was the first genuine affection she had felt in months. From the garden, Peter noticed the interaction. He paused, studying Grace with new interest. She wasn't like the other employees. There was something different about her, a quiet sadness mixed with genuine kindness. Over the following days, Noah began seeking Grace out. He would appear beside her as she worked, asking for stories, asking if she could play. Grace tried to maintain professional distance, but it was difficult. Noah's need for attention was so clear, his longing so obvious. Grace found herself talking to him in gentle ways. She shared small memories, told him stories about flowers and gardens. She never pushed for responses, but Noah gradually opened up. He left her a drawing, a house with two stick figures holding hands. Eleanor noticed the growing closeness and immediately called Grace into her office. "You're not here to play," she said coldly. "That boy doesn't need another nanny." Grace nodded silently, but something inside her had shifted. She couldn't unsee Noah's need now. She couldn't ignore it. One rainy afternoon, as Grace moved through the hallway with folded towels, Noah called out softly, "Mommy." Grace stopped dead. The word hit her like a physical blow. She turned to see Noah standing there, confused as if he'd spoken without thinking. Grace couldn't respond. She walked away quickly and locked herself in the service room, tears finally breaking through the wall she had built. Peter found her there. He didn't ask questions. He simply sat quietly, offering presence instead of words. When Grace finally spoke, she whispered about Emma, about her daughter, about the cancer that had taken her so quickly. Peter listened without judgment. "You don't have to talk," he said gently. "I know," Grace replied, "but thank you." While cleaning the toy room, Grace found Noah holding something that made her world stop. A necklace, a delicate chain with a small heart-shaped pendant. She had given that necklace to Emma at the hospital, right before everything fell apart. Grace's hands trembled as she knelt beside Noah. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. "Grandma gave it to me," Noah said simply. "She said it belonged to my sister." Grace felt her knees weaken. She recognized every detail, the tiny flower engraved in the center, the soft pink tone, even the small crack on the clasp. She had noticed that crack the day she placed it around Emma's neck in the hospital. That evening, Grace searched her belongings. The necklace had vanished the day Emma was declared dead. She had placed it in a cloth pouch at the hospital. Now it was hanging from Noah's neck, supposedly a gift from Eleanor about a granddaughter that didn't exist. Grace couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, her mind spiraling. Something was terribly wrong. The next morning, Grace began her own investigation. She watched Eleanor more closely, noting her movements, her patterns. She explored areas of the mansion she hadn't been in before and discovered a locked door in the north wing. She tried every key, but none worked. That evening, Peter found her near the door. "You've been different lately," he said quietly. Grace hesitated, then whispered about Emma, the necklace, and her growing certainty that something terrible had happened. Peter's expression became serious. "If you're looking for answers, I'll help," he said. Together, they formed a careful plan. While Eleanor was out, Grace entered her office. She found a locked metal box in Eleanor's drawer, exactly where Peter said it would be. They couldn't open it that day, but they now knew it existed. That weekend, Grace took a day off and went to the hospital where Emma had died 4 years earlier. She went to the records department and asked for information on her daughter. "There's no record," the woman said after searching. "That file was removed from the system the week of the reported death. There's no digital or paper copy. No body was released." Grace sat on a bench outside the hospital, unable to move. The evidence was clear now. Emma was not dead. But where was she? And what had Eleanor done? Grace returned to the mansion with grim determination. She and Peter obtained a copy of the basement key. Early one morning, before the staff stirred, they stood before the locked door in the north wing. Grace's hands shook as she inserted the key. It clicked. The door opened, revealing stairs descending into darkness. They found a hidden basement room. It was clean, organized, and arranged like a child's bedroom. Expensive toys lined shelves. Books were stacked carefully. A table held drawing paper and crayons. Cameras were mounted on the walls, and standing in the center of the room was a young girl. She had clear, light eyes and light brown hair tied neatly back. She didn't cry or run. She simply stared at Grace with a still, confused expression. Grace froze. Then she fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Emma," she whispered. Emma tilted her head slightly, but said nothing. She didn't know her own mother. Grace didn't rush to hold her. She could see the girl had been isolated for years. She was physically healthy, but emotionally distant, untouched by normal childhood experiences. Grace and Peter left Emma's room carefully, locking the door behind them. They couldn't move her yet. They needed a plan. That afternoon, Grace went directly to Eleanor's lounge and knocked hard. Eleanor opened the door with her usual cold posture. Grace's voice shook as she spoke. "I know. I saw her. I saw Emma." Eleanor didn't flinch. She simply said, "She's more mine than yours now." William appeared in the doorway, confused but alert. He had heard the last words. "Your mother took my daughter," Grace said to him, her voice breaking. "Emma is alive. She's been locked downstairs for 4 years." William looked at his mother. "Is this true?" Eleanor lifted her chin. "I did what was necessary. That child needed structure, protection. Grace was a mess. She didn't deserve another chance." William stepped back as if physically struck. "You kept a child in the basement," he whispered. Eleanor's response was calmly delivered. "I saved her." Grace shook her head, tears streaming. "You didn't save her. You imprisoned her." William looked lost, unable to process. But he said quietly, "We'll fix this." Grace returned the next morning, but guards stopped her at the gate. "You're not allowed in," they said. She pleaded with them, desperate to see Emma, but they refused. Grace walked away with tears in her eyes. Inside the mansion, Emma had been returned to the locked room. Cameras were turned back on. William retreated into his office, avoiding everyone. Eleanor issued orders to the staff to remain silent, but Grace refused to give up. She obtained Noah's hairbrush and sent hair strands to a private DNA lab. Within days, the results arrived. Noah and Emma were siblings. The match was undeniable. She hired a lawyer named Martha, who reviewed her evidence: the hospital records, the missing file, photographs of Emma's room, and now the DNA test. Martha's expression was grim. "This is enough to move forward," she said. Martha filed a formal complaint with Child Protection Services and the police department. Within hours, the authorities moved. A judge approved a warrant. Black police cars pulled up in front of the Bennett mansion. Officers emerged with legal documents and purposeful steps. Eleanor was in the sitting room when they arrived. She stood immediately. "This is my home. You can't just walk in here," she shouted. But they moved past her with authority. Grace guided the officers to the north wing, to the locked basement door. When they opened Emma's room, she looked up confused. A female officer knelt down gently. "It's okay, sweetie. You're safe now." Emma didn't move until Grace stepped forward. "Emma, it's me, Mommy." Slowly, Emma walked into her mother's arms. Grace held her tightly, tears streaming down her face. Eleanor followed them, shouting threats and claims. But her words meant nothing now. One of the officers calmly said, "Ma'am, you're under arrest for child abduction, illegal confinement, document forgery, and psychological abuse." They led Eleanor away in handcuffs as reporters gathered at the gates, cameras flashing. The legal process moved quickly. With undeniable evidence, Eleanor was convicted and sentenced to prison. Grace was granted full custody of Emma. Emma needed time and therapy. The doctors said she would need to relearn normal childhood experiences, but she would recover. Grace promised to follow every recommendation. She moved Emma into a small, warm house near town. It was filled with soft colors, toys, and space to play. Every night, Grace tucked her in and whispered, "You're home." Emma adjusted slowly. She was quiet at first, barely speaking, but Grace was patient. She attended every therapy session, supported every small step forward. After a few months, Emma started school. She was nervous at first, but gradually made friends. One afternoon, she came home with a drawing. "This is me," she said, pointing to a figure holding hands with others. "That's Noah. That's you." Grace placed it on the refrigerator and smiled. Emma was getting her childhood back. William had also changed. He saw the children regularly and eventually allowed Noah to stay with Grace part-time. He told Grace, "I need time to rebuild myself. I can't be what they need right now." Grace understood. She agreed to keep him informed about everything. Peter remained a constant presence, helping with repairs, bringing groceries, sitting in the garden with the children. He had become family. As months passed, the town's attitude shifted. Grace, once viewed with suspicion, was now seen as someone of tremendous courage. People greeted her with kindness. The mayor's office invited her to speak at a community event and presented her with a bravery award. Grace stood on stage with Emma and Noah beside her. She didn't give a long speech, just, "Truth always matters, no matter how long it takes." The applause was warm and genuine. Emma's birth certificate was corrected. Her identity was restored officially. Grace framed a copy and placed it in their hallway, a daily reminder of how far they had come. Eleanor remained in prison, receiving no visitors, facing her crimes alone. One evening, as Grace and Emma sat together, Grace took out the heart necklace. She had kept it, not out of pain, but as a reminder of the turning point, the moment when truth broke through silence. "This is yours," Grace said gently, fastening it around Emma's neck. Emma touched the pendant and smiled. She didn't fully understand its history yet, but someday she would. Grace had come into the Bennett mansion as a desperate widow seeking survival. She had left as a mother who fought for everything she loved. The necklace no longer symbolized loss. It symbolized victory. A small piece of jewelry had revealed a hidden truth and set a child free. Emma was smiling more each day. Noah was thriving, William was slowly rebuilding himself, Peter remained loyal, and Grace had finally found something she thought was lost forever. Home, peace, a life built on truth, not secrets. The walls of the Bennett mansion no longer held darkness. They had become witness to a mother's love, a truth that refused to stay buried, and a family remade from the broken pieces of the past. Grace had survived, and more than that, she had won.